the unification, the oneness of Hashem. We're speaking about the unification, the oneness of Hashem in the upper worlds. And now we're going to be moving on to the unification of Hashem in the lower worlds. Essentially, the theme of what we're learning about is called Malchus. Malchus. Malchus means the kingship of Hashem. And we're going to learn that the energy of Malchus is a very fluid energy. In other words, when Malchus is associated from where she comes from, when Malchus is associated with the higher spheres, then Malchus loses her borders and definition, and she absorbs back into the source where she comes from. This is known as the ray of light as it exists on the surface of the sun. That's called the perspective of Malchus absorbed in her source, where she loses definition. That's called Yehuda Ilah, upper unification. Yehuda Tata, lower unification, is when Malchus has a sharpening of definition and time and space start to become relevant and predominant, but she never loses the connection to where she comes from, i.e., she's totally aware that she's filled with the light coming from the sun, but the perspective of Yehuda Tata is such as the ray of light coming off the sun. And the first part of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Echad is the ray of light as it exists on the surface of the sun, that's Yehuda Ilah. And Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Li'olam Vad is the ray of light as it exists coming away from the sun. So now we're going into Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Li'olam Vad. We're going into Yehuda Tata. So here we go. V'hine. Afal pi shu yisborach lamala me'amokum ve'azman. Even though Hashem is above time and space, when we say Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, even though we don't say it Yud Kei Vav Kei, we say Aleph Dal Nun Yud. Yud Kei Vav Kei represents that Hashem is Haya Hoy V'Viyeh. Was, is, and forever will be, all at the same time. That's pretty impressive. Daniel, can you be in the past, now, and in the future?
No.
From our perspective, in a world of five senses, you're referring to something that was in the past, you're thinking about the future, or you're in the present. What about space? Can you be here and on Jupiter at the same time? Even the fact that I'm saying time is all limitation. So Hashem exists above space and time. Malchus is the world where space and time start to exist. Afal pikein hu nimtza gam lamata b'makum v'zman. Even though Hashem is above, that's Yud Kei Vav Kei, even though from the perspective of the ray of light on the surface of the sun, there's no definition anymore of the ray of light, but as the ray of light is moving away from the sun, that's called the Midah of Malchus. Malchus, as she's coming away from her source, which is the creation of the world, this world, there's a sharpening of definition, the form of time and space. And as the ray is moving further and further away, that's the crystallization of this world. But never to think that the ray of light is for 1 second disassociated from the source that she comes from. That's called Yehuda Tata, the lower unification. Is that even though I look into this world of multiplicity, I know for every single second, every moment that I'm looking around, that Hashem's light is filling this world. So in Yehuda Ilah, I don't see shtenders. What do I see? The light of Hashem. In Yehuda Tata, do I see shtenders? Yes. But what's inside the shtender? The light of Hashem. But I see the light of Hashem as it's expressing inside the shtenders. In Yehuda Ilah, I just see Yud Kei Vav Kei. Malchus loses herself back in the surface of the sun. Generally, we talk about when Hashem does open miracles, that's called Yehuda Ilah. You see a total breaking of the form and confines of this world. That's called Yehuda Ilah. Yehuda Tata is when Hashem does hidden miracles. What's a famous hidden miracle, my friends? Purim. Beautiful. Does it say Hashem's name in the Purim story? No. Were any laws of nature broken in the Purim story?
Yes.
When you read the simple Purim story? None, right? But you have this sneaking suspicion like something's going on here. Everything is normal, nothing to see here. Just regular, a king, and he throws a party, and, why wouldn't the king ask his wife to come without any clothing on, except the crown? And then she refuses, and then he gets upset about that, and, all normal things, has her killed, and they go and find another queen, it happens to be Esther, and all the details. And when you get to the end of the story, that's why we open the entire Megillah up. When you see the entire Megillah Esther, you have a feeling like something is going on here. And by the way, if you open up the Kabbalah books, they'll show you, Kesem Paz, they'll show you how the entire Megillah Esther has Hashem's names in it, woven everywhere. Rosh Tevis, Seif Tevis, in between the letters, Hashem's name is all over the place. That's called Yehuda Tata, the lower unification. Where you don't see space and time dissolving. You don't see it being suspended, the perspective of space and time. You don't see Malchus losing definition. You see a world of a king and people and a bad guy and some good guys. But you have this feeling like there's much more than meets the eye, that Hashem is running the entire story. That's Yehuda Tata. Yehuda Ilah, the upper unification, is if Hashem took Haman and just made him turn into, a fiery image, and then Hashem had Haman floating in the air, defying all the laws of gravity, becoming a representative of Hashem by admitting that everything did was wrong, and then Hashem having Haman fly to Jupiter and go through outer space without an oxygen mask and come back down to Earth and do all these interesting things. That would just be a suspension of time and space. That would be called Yehuda Ilah, where you would see Hashem, the defining factors of this world starting to dissolve. By the way, was Hanukkah Yehuda Ilah or Yehuda Tata?
Tata. Both?
It was both. Hanukkah is both. Why? The war with the ancient Greeks.
That's lower.
There was no miracle. Every single bow that was shot, every single elephant that attempted to step on a small group of Jews, everything missed. It was a small family of Kohanim fighting the entire Greek-Syrian Empire. Tens of thousands of well-trained troops with elephants fighting a few Jews with some, lulav and esrogs. And every single time the Greek-Syrian Empire would try to do something, it would miss. And every single time that Yochanan Kohen Gadol would throw an esrog, it would bop the guy in the head. And therefore there was no open miracle. But when you take a step back and you look at the entirety of the situation, it's pretty obvious that Hashem was helping. But then there was another part of Hanukkah. When we came into the Beis HaMikdash and we only found enough oil to light for one day. And how long did that oil light? For 8 days. So there you can't say that there was that God had that God wasn't suspending the laws of nature. If this much oil lights for a day, it doesn't all of a sudden light for 8 days. So that Yehuda Ilah is God suspended the definitions of nature. That's like the miracle in the Beis HaMikdash, where the Aron Kodesh was Einer Min Amida. How wide was the Beis HaMikdash? Altogether, 20 amas.
20 amas.
And how far was it from one end of the Aron to the wall and the other end of the Aron to the wall? It was 10 amas from this side to the wall and 10 from here to here.
Yes.
So where was the Aron? The whole way across is 20. You're like me saying, from here to the wall is 10 amas, from here to the wall is 10 amas, and from the wall to the wall is 20 amas.
Mm-hmm. Where are you?
So is that suspending space and time?
Yes.
Yeah, that's called Yehuda Ilah. That's upper unification. That even in this world, you start to see that this world loses all definition. That Yud Kei Vav Kei is predominant. That's why upper unification is Yud Kei Vav Kei over Aleph Dal Nun Yud. And that's when you spell out in the Shiluv of Yud and an Aleph and a Hey and a Dalid and a Vav and a Nun and a Hey and a Yud. You begin with Yud Kei Vav Kei and then you weave in Aleph Dal Nun Yud. But in the world of Yehuda Tata, where Aleph Dal Nun Yud have predominant energy, she holds on to form. You still see a Stender. You still see the Greek-Syrian army fighting a bunch of Maccabees. You see that. But you have this sense like Hashem is totally involved. It's the Purim story. Okay? Tahainu, second to last line. Shemis yached b'midas malchusai shemimenu nimshach v'nishave hamokoim v'hazman. When Yud Kei Vav Kei comes into Aleph Dal Nun Yud, so Aleph Dal Nun Yud is like holding on to her identity a bit and allowing space and time to exist. V'zeo Yehuda Tata. This is the lower unification. Shilav Havaya Ba'adnus Baruch Hu. Next page. Tahainu Shemahusoi Va'atzmusoi Yisborach Hanikra B'Shem Ein Soif Baruch Hu. That Hashem's essence, the endless light, has found a space in this world. Maleis kol haaretz mamish, and Hashem's light fills this world mamish, bizman v'mokoim. Hashem's light fills this world everywhere. Ki b'shamayim imal ve'ala haaretz v'dalet sitrin hakol mal ma'or ein soif baruch hu b'shava mamish. Is Hashem's light everywhere in Yehuda Tata? In Yehuda Ilah, Hashem's light, there's not even a world anymore. We're talking about the ray of the sun as it exists on the sun. It's there, but you don't see it. It's totally, Malchus loses definition. There's no more time and space. From the perspective of Yehuda Tata, of the ray of light moving away from the sun, so what do you see as the ray of light is moving away from the sun? You start to see time and space, but the ray is coming from the sun. So it's the same sun that's filling now time and space. Just the perspective of Malchus and Yehuda Tata allows us to experience time and space as Hashem is coming into time and space. Ki kachu ba'aretz mitachas kamoi b'shamayim imal mamish. And Hashem's light is down here in the lowest place, which is so Chanukah-dik, as it exists in the highest worlds. In the world of Yehuda Tata, is that Hashem's light is filling Malchus. Ki akol hu bechinas mokum habotel b'metzias ba'or ein soif baruch hu hamislabish boy al de midas malchusai hamiyuchedes boy yisborach rak shemidas malchusai hi midas hatzimtzum ve'ahester lahaster or ein soif baruch hu shelo yevatlu azman ve'amokum mimetziusum legamrei v'lo yeshum bechinas zman u'mokum b'metzias afilu letachtoinim. That the light of Hashem is coming through all the way, and that light is being given layers and is filling all those layers. This is the world of Yehuda Tata. one of the mashal that the Tanya brings is that imagine you have a king. And you know the king is the most amazing being, and all you want to do is the greatest thing you could do is you would want to hug the king. So you know what you do? You come over and you think, but I can't hug the king like he's wearing clothing. I wouldn't really be hugging the king, right? So the guy says to you, what are you talking about? You're nuts. Just, if the king lets you hug him, you're hugging him, not hugging his clothing. No, you don't understand, the king has a lot of layers of clothing on. He's wearing a ski jacket. I'm not hugging him. That you are nuts. The king wants to give you a hug and you're not going to hug him? No, but I want to hug him. Nobody would listen to that person. When you hug the king, even though he's wearing a jacket, you're hugging the king. The king's inside the jacket. You gave the king a hug. So the Baal HaTanya says that Hashem's taking his light and he's dressing his light. And he's putting layers upon layers called the natural world. And he's putting his light through the spheres. And you come into this world and you, so to speak, you grab the king. And you learn his Torah. And you do his mitzvahs. And you're hugging the king. Yeah, but I want to go back up to the face of the sun. Why do I need to only hug the king when there's layers? Because the king is inside the layers. The king is inside the clothing. Sometimes people, when they get really into learning, they start thinking by the way, this is things that tzaddikim go through, like Nadav and Avihu. Everybody remember what happened to Nadav and Avihu? They brought the Eish Zara into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Aaron's sons, and they brought an offering that they were not supposed to bring. They brought a fire pan, an offering into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and Hashem, it was too much light for them. They tried to hug the king without any layers. So there is such a thing that a person tries to do that. They want it to be close, but Hashem says, you can't just hug the king like that. There has to be a certain... In the world of Yehuda Ilah, you're hugging the king without any clothing. By the way, that's why you don't spend all day in Yehuda Ilah. You don't say Shema all the time. There wouldn't be much of a world. Shema is Yehuda Ilah. Yehuda Tata is now there is a world and Hashem is inside the world. Okay? Masha Kosav Yuvan. Everything that we've explained will help us understand the following. Masha Kosav. This is in Sefer Malachi, which is the final book of prophecy, which is interesting what the prophets are trying to teach us. In the end of days, this is the final prophecy. And the prophet says, Ani Hashem lo shanisi. God says, I am God, I do not change. God doesn't change his mind, contrary to people what they might think. And God doesn't change. Now what does that mean? What we're really talking about is a very deep thing, which is that you might have thought, well, God had to have changed. I mean, before the creation, God is the infinite one. Now God is infinite plus creation. Didn't something change? Like we weren't here before creation. Sounds like something changed. Bereshis, it sounded like it was a major change. The prophet says nothing changed. Nothing changed from God's perspective. From our perspective, something changed. All that creation did is an important, very important, in the core, deepest core of Jewish philosophy. Creation did not introduce anything new to the world from God's perspective. All that creation did was it introduced a perspective from creation's perspective. Is that now creation has a perspective of a world. But from God's perspective, Ani Hashem lo shanisi, I am exactly the same pre-creation and post-creation. one of the famous analogies that is used for this, we've mentioned a number of times, is like a big goin, like a genius who knows the entire Torah Kula, and he wants to now give a class on Aleph Beis. So if the Baba Sali would come into this room right now and tell us everything he knows about Aleph Beis, so we'd be on the floor screaming Hashem Hu Elokim. So what does he do? If the Baba Sali would come into this room, he would conceal what he knows about Aleph Beis and just say to us, an Aleph, it's really made up of 3 letters, a Yud and a Vav in the middle, and then another Yud, which is Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's also Yechudu Ilah, Yechudu Tata, it's a yin yang. He would start telling us, I don't know if he'd bring the yin yang part, but he would say that in his own way. And we'd be able to understand the words of an Aleph from the Baba Sali. But does the Baba Sali know what an Aleph is? Did anything change in him when he is reducing what he knows about an Aleph? From his perspective, he knows exactly what an Aleph is. He's just revealing that which is necessary in order to allow a relationship for an other. So Hashem is doing the same thing. Hashem is concealing his light, even though Hashem knows who he is, in order to allow for creation to exist and not be completely consumed by the infinite light. So there's a holding back of the light and allowing for creation to begin to take form. And as we get to Malchus, from the perspective of Malchus, Malchus is the perspective of that the creation starts to feel like it has perspective and borders, and the unification of Yehuda Tata is that within the borders I see the light of Hashem, and Yehuda Elah is you stop seeing such borders. You start experiencing only the oneness. Yeah?
Where does the light go when it's concealed?
It doesn't go anywhere. It's right here. It's just from our perspective, you don't see it until you start peeling back the layers. It's until you start learning Tanya, until you start learning Pnimis HaTorah. And when you do that, you start achieving what's called Yehuda Tata. Yehuda Tata means even in the confines and the concealment and space and time, I see that this is all emanating from the one who exists outside of space and time, like the ray coming off the sun.
Like night vision goggles, or like a special radio. It's like Rav Noah Weinberg used to say, like, you hear the Japanese like music right now, you don't hear it. It's like it's here, you can't tell. It's like, oh, it's because you have to like put the radio on the right frequency, and then like there's like radio waves blasting all over the world.
That's right, it's here. My father would always say about the shortwave. He would hang out, like under the covers, listening to shortwave radio, and you could hear all sorts of interesting things, even though I don't hear it, but it's here. It's mamish here. My father-in-law, who always speaks about, did prophecy really leave the world, or do we just not have the antennas to pick up on it? So he's actually coming to the Holy Land. So yeah, that's right. Baruch Hashem, we're gonna have some time with my father-in-law. Very, very holy Yid, who's gonna drop his bomba Torahs on us.
When is he coming?
He's coming tomorrow.
Wow.
Baruch Hashem.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, very exciting. So you guys get to glean from his vast array of Torah knowledge. Is that he always talks about that Hashem is broadcasting prophecy at all times. It's just that we became disassociated with it because we spend so much time just watching Hollywood movies. And therefore, our sensors to the refined messages have become shtupped up, have become coagulated. We're no longer able to listen carefully to the flow and to the messages that are trying to come through. Okay, so we're entering the world of Yehuda Tato now, of lower unification. We're going to speak Mitzvah Hashem more tomorrow about that Hashem does not change and bring a few perspectives about this. We should be Zaycha Mamish to Mashit Tzidkeinu B'mihir of Yameinu. Amen. Amen. Kol Tuv, Rabbi Isai. A wonderful week.